The fiancée hid the maid's face because she was more beautiful than her, until the billionaire saw her. The emerald silk of Elena's gown whispered against the marble floor of the grand ballroom, a sound as soft and deceptive as her smile. She was a masterpiece of curated perfection, every hair in place, every diamond catching the chandelier's light with calculated brilliance. Tonight was the night, the culmination of years of strategic social climbing and careful manipulation. Her engagement to Alexander Sterling, the reclusive billionaire tech mogul, would finally be announced to the world. But at the heart of her meticulous plan was a single, volatile flaw: her maid, Anya. Anya was not just a maid. She was a ghost Elena kept imprisoned in her own home. A girl with skin the color of warm honey and eyes the shade of a stormy sea, a face of such startling, natural beauty that it could shatter Elena's carefully constructed world with a single glance. Elena had hired her from a rundown orphanage years ago, seeing not a person, but a threat. A weapon to be neutralized. For the past 2 years, Anya's face had been a secret. Elena insisted she wear a simple, unassuming cloth mask whenever she was in the public areas of the Sterling mansion. For hygiene purposes, she'd explain with a dismissive wave to any curious guest, before quickly ordering Anya to clean or fetch something, effectively banishing her from sight. Anya bore this humiliation silently, her spirit dimmed, but not extinguished. The mask was a muzzle, but her eyes, her eyes still held a well of untold stories and a quiet, resilient strength. She was a ghost in her own life, existing on the fringes of a world she was forbidden to enter. Tonight, as she watched from the shadows of the servants' corridor, she saw Elena shimmer beneath the lights. Then she saw him, Alexander Sterling. He was not the typical, ostentatious billionaire. He was all sharp angles and brooding intensity. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd just run his hands through it in frustration, and his eyes held a weary intelligence that seemed to see through the gilded facade of his world. He was a storm cloud in a sea of sunshine, and Anya felt a strange jolt of recognition. She knew loneliness when she saw it. Elena was a constant presence by his side, her laughter too loud, her touch too practiced. She kept him tethered to the party, a prized exhibit on her arm. But at the stroke of 10, Alexander grew restless. With a curt excuse to Elena, he slipped away from the cacophony and wandered, seeking solitude. He found it in the quiet of the East Library, a sanctuary of old leather and forgotten stories. Elena had forbidden Anya from the main event, but she had tasked her with ensuring the library was perfectly prepared, anticipating Alexander's need for escape. Anya was in the library, adjusting a single, perfectly placed rose in a crystal vase. A wisp of her chestnut hair had escaped the severe bun Elena demanded, and the soft lamplight caught the delicate curve of her neck above the high collar of her uniform. She heard the click of the door and froze, her back to the entrance. "Leave us," came a deep, masculine voice, laced with an edge of impatience. He thought she was a guest. Anya didn't dare speak. She shook her head minutely, keeping her face averted. A beat of silence. "I said leave." She could feel his presence behind her, a shift in the very air of the room. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had to obey. Elena's wrath was a terrifying thing. She began to turn, determined to keep her head bowed. But a gentle, yet insistent, hand caught her chin. The touch was electric, a jolt that startled her. Before she could react, Alexander's fingers, cool and firm, tilted her face upward. His other hand moved, not cruelly, but with a simple, quiet curiosity, and hooked the edge of the mask. With a soft tug, he pulled it down. The cloth fell away, and the world stopped. Anya's face was finally, completely revealed. The delicate arch of her brows, the impossibly long lashes that framed those storm-gray eyes, the soft curve of her cheeks, and her lips, full and parted in surprise. It was a face of breathtaking, ethereal beauty, untouched by the harshness of her life. There was a purity, a luminous quality that no makeup could ever replicate. Alexander didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stared, his eyes searching hers as if they held the answers to a question he hadn't yet learned to ask. The cool indifference he wore like armor seemed to crack, revealing a flicker of something raw and vulnerable. Elena, having noticed his absence, stormed into the library. "Alexander, there you are. I was so worried." Her voice died in her throat. The sight that met her eyes was her worst nightmare made manifest. Her fiancé was holding her maid's mask, his focus completely, utterly consumed by the face he was seeing for the first time. The face she had so carefully hidden. The silence was deafening. Elena's face contorted, a mask of polished ice cracking to reveal a desperate, ugly fury. "Anya," she shrieked, her voice a shrill violation of the peace. "What do you think you're doing? How dare you show your face to our guests? Get out! Get out of here this instant." Anya flinched as if struck, the command a familiar brand of pain. But Alexander's hand, still resting gently under her chin, held her steady. He didn't even glance at Elena. "The maid, Alexander," Elena insisted, her voice trembling with a desperate, frantic edge. "She's just the maid. She's nothing. A servant who has forgotten her place. She must have taken off her mask. It must have been a trick too."
"Silence, Elena."
The two words were quiet, but they sliced through the air with the finality of a blade. They were not spoken with anger, but with a cold, distant authority that was far more terrifying. It was the sound of a man who had seen through the illusion. Alexander finally turned to look at his fiancée. His gaze was no longer the weary tolerance of before. It was clear, assessing, and utterly devoid of affection. "For 2 years," he said, his voice dangerously low, "I have seen this young woman flitting through my home like a ghost. Always masked, always invisible, at your insistence." He held up the simple piece of cloth. "Was it for hygiene, Elena? Or was it for jealousy?"
"Okay."
"It's not. She's practically a child from the gutter. I was protecting her. It's for her own good, to save her from unwanted attention." Elena's protests were a jumble of lies and panic. "You are protecting yourself," Alexander stated flatly, "from the truth." He looked back at Anya, his voice softening into something unrecognizable. It was a tenderness that had never been directed at Elena. "What is your name?" Anya," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Anya," he repeated, as if tasting a rare and exquisite wine. A beautiful name for a face that should never have been hidden. "Do you know why I came here tonight, Elena?" He finally turned to his fiancée. "It was to end this farce. To tell you, I could not go through with our engagement. I felt no passion, no true connection. I merely felt obligation. I was going to break it off with you privately to save you the public embarrassment." He gestured around the library, his expression hardening once more. "But this has saved me the trouble of being diplomatic. I see now exactly who you are. A woman so consumed by her own vanity and insecurity that she would cruelly hide another's beauty. That is not the kind of person I could ever marry." He turned his back on the sputtering, enraged Elena, his full attention fixed on Anya. "Anya," he said, his voice a low, compelling murmur. "I see you, the real you, the one she tried so hard to erase." He lifted a hand, and with a tenderness that was breathtaking, he brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers lightly grazing her cheek. Anya shivered, not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming intensity of his gaze. It was the first time in her life anyone had looked at her and seen her. Not her uniform, not her lowly status, not just a pretty face, but her. "Tonight," Alexander declared, "everything changes." In one swift, decisive move, he shrugged off his tailor-made jacket and draped it over Anya's trembling shoulders. It was a protective gesture, a declaration. He was pulling her out of the shadows and placing her beside him for all the world to see. Elena could only watch in horror as the man she'd schemed for years to capture, the man whose ring she wore, helped the faceless maid down from the library dais and led her toward the grand ballroom. She was left behind, a discarded relic of her own deception, her social victory turning to ash in her mouth. Alexander didn't stop at the ballroom. He walked through the stunned crowd, the whispers rising like a swarm of bees. He ignored the flash of cameras, the gasps of shock. His only focus was the woman on his arm, her storm-gray eyes wide with confusion and a dawning, impossible hope. He led her onto the terrace, away from the prying eyes and the stifling air of the mansion. Under a canopy of stars, he turned to her. "Anya," he said, her name a promise on his lips. "Tell me everything. From the beginning. I want to know the woman behind the mask, the one who was made to hide her light." For the first time, Anya truly looked back at him. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, a mirror of her own. She saw a man who had been drowning in a sea of gold, searching for something genuine. And in that moment, with the cool night air on her bare face and the warmth of his jacket around her shoulders, the ghost of a girl disappeared. Anya, no longer a shadow, began her first real story.